Well, we get to introduce one of our own coming up here and speaking today. So let's give it up for Leif.
Don't give too much up. Good morning. Good morning. Well, thank you, intrepid souls, for getting here today. I don't know if it's, the low pressure or all the carcinogens from the Costco chicken I ate last night, but I'm kind of foggy today. We'll see how this goes. That's an old speaker ploy, we set the, expectations right off the bat. But seriously, we should all as Christians be Bereans. And what I mean by that is, when we're going through our day and we hear something, or we're at church and we hear something, we check it out. We go back and we have the Bible and we make sure that lines up. And that's our responsibility. And we're blessed here and now. But in a way, I don't know if I want to use the word curse, but there's more of an onus on us than there was in the previous years, like say before the printing press. And somebody would hear something, they didn't have a Bible at home. But God judges us on the light we have. I guess where I'm going with this is we all have access to this, every single one of us. And it's a blessing to have this. And shame on us if we don't, or if we're not into this and we don't know what it says. Because I do think when we stand in front of God, if there's willful ignorance and we were too lazy to figure it out, I don't think that's going to bode well for us. So. Or at least I don't want to be in that position. Okay, so on the bulletin, the name of this sermon is Run Your Race. Is that what it was? Run Your Race? Something like that. So here's where I'm going to start off. In Hebrews 12:1, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So a little background on the book of Hebrews is it was written to Jews that were suffering persecution, and there were some of them that were thinking, this is getting pretty nasty, this is getting pretty hard, and we think we may just go back to the old way of doing things. At that point, the temple had not been destroyed, and so there were still animal sacrifices going on. There still was the classical form of Judaism. And so some of these people thought, what, that seemed to work, let's do that. And of course, the writer of Hebrews said, no, don't do that. But it was written to humans going through hard times. And so I like that because if you're alive on this planet, there's a good chance you're maybe going through hard times. So it's very applicable. You've never been to a cake race or a cakewalk, where somebody was hollering at the other person in the cakewalk, hang in there, Buford, you can do it, you can do it. No, because cakewalks are cakewalks, that's why we have that term, but life is not a cakewalk. So anyway, I got 4 points here today. And the first one is, we shouldn't be surprised when we suffer or we have trials as Christians. We shouldn't be. That should not catch us by surprise. Now, I know as Americans, sometimes people get blown off the road and into the ditch because suffering comes and it kind of blindsides them. They didn't think it would happen. Because we have so many pills, and we have so many doctors, and we have airbags, and we got big daddy government, and we got all these things as Americans that we think are going to just kind of help us glide through life and nothing's ever going to happen. Well, that's not true. It's not true, and as Christians, we know that's not true. So we should never be surprised when something happens to us. I remember I grew up in the Assemblies of God church, And by the way, I didn't have a choice to go there. I mean, I was 2 years old. I mean, what am I going to do? Tell my parents, no, I don't want to go here? I'm not knocking the Assemblies of God. I'm just saying that's where, my parents went, and that's where they carted me off to. Anyway, the pastor there was a guy named Benny Davis. And I think I was about in junior high, and he said, you're either coming out of a trial, you're in a trial, or you're coming out of one. Going in, you're in, or coming out. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, what a downer. What's up with this guy? That's not true. First, when you're in junior high, life can kind of seem like that. But he was right. And then I remember one time listening to this old preacher's podcast, and he was talking about, he was counseling this couple that was going to get married. And he told this couple, you're going to have troubles, you're going to have trials, and so let's talk about that and how we're going to work through that. And the couple said to this old preacher, true story, they said, well, you're not being very positive. And he said, no, I'm positive, you're going to have trouble. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is, we don't have to be glad when trouble comes our way, but we should never be too surprised, at least not for very long. I'll read a couple verses here. 1 Peter 4:12, dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you are going through, as if something strange were happening to you. You ever know people that something bad happens to them, and it's like, what in the world's going on here? Me? Let us not do that. 1 Peter 1:6-8, so be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. And a little while there, by the way, doesn't mean a little while like when we're on this planet, like a couple years. He's talking about the big eternity, and the little while being our life on this planet. And I like how he says, endure many trials. And Jesus, in John 16, said, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. And it makes me think about the first song we sang today, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. So that's my first point. Let's not be blindsided. Let's not be surprised. Now, that doesn't mean when something happens to you, you can't kind of reel and whoa for a little while. But at some point, you got to get to the point where in your head you realize, hey, this is where I live. This is this planet, and stuff's going to happen. And of course, Jesus is with us. Now, this next subject, I'm going on to point 2 here. In this subject, in my notes here, I put why suffering, and I put the devil, and I put God. And I want to give a disclaimer before I start this particular point, which is probably the hardest point, is I don't claim to fully understand all of this, and I don't fully claim to understand all what went on and goes on behind the curtain in the unseen world with God and the devil. I'm not going there. But there's some things I do know, right? From reading this and from living. One is, in the garden we fractured our relationship with God. C.S. Lewis says we sinned ourselves into being a new creature. So there's something there. There's something there that happened that spread this out through all humanity. God said, when you eat this apple, you'll die. Well, dying is painful. Death and dying and pain, they're all related. And so while we may be alive and we're in this room, in a sense, we're still dying. We're still dying, and there's pain involved in that. Again, I'm just throwing out some stuff that I have come up with, not the full Monty here. Another thing about this fall and pain and being separated from God is God could have just looked in. He could have just looked into this planet and seen what was going on, and he could have chose option A or B. He could have said, well, they chose to do that. They made their sandwich, they can eat it. Or find some other kind of an outside way of helping us, like maybe saying, okay, start over, redo, I'll forget what Adam and Eve did, and we'll just have to start over. But what he did was, Instead, he chose to participate. And by participate, I mean Christ. Christ came next down. He came down. He suffered. He suffered for us. So it's really a wonderful story when you think of the fall and what's happened on this planet, and the separation, and being, different creatures, and how God himself chose to put himself into this world, into this planet, to participate with us, be with us, and share in that pain. Another ingredient in this, point number 2, is free will. And I don't claim to know exactly how free will and God's sovereignty intersects, but I know God is sovereign, and I also know we have free will. And if you read the Bible too, God says that he's preparing people that will rule and reign with him. And there's something about that rule and reign with him that he wants people that have gone through this life. It's a boot camp for the next life. And those are the people that choose him, that stay with him, to fit with him, that will then get to rule and reign with him for all time. If God is love, he is by definition something more than just kindness. Sometimes in this culture we see people being kind by supporting people, or maybe not saying something to somebody that they see their life is heading over a cliff, but that's not real love. Real love is when you tell somebody, this isn't going to end well for you. You need to stop this. Even if it causes that person some pain temporarily, that's real love. And so there's a connection there between God being love and the pain and suffering that we go through. We got sin. We deal with sin. We wrestle with the flesh. And if you had a cancer and you went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, I'm going to get this cancer out again. And he kind of started digging around on you, and then maybe you woke up and he said something like, yeah, it's going to hurt kind of bad, and it's going to be hard to get all of it out, so I'm not going to get all of it out, I'm just going to get some of it out. Would you think he was a good doctor? Probably not. You wouldn't. At the moment you think, well, gee, I don't want that pain, but when you really started processing, you'd think, I want that all out of me, even if it hurts. And God is a good surgeon. He loves us. And he wants to make us like Christ. And he wants to get as much of us out of us as he can. There's something else about this planet that, why it is the way it is. Like I said, I don't claim to know that, but it is a mixture of good and evil, and we do have free will, and we go through this life, and God is watching us. Remember the old band, Jethro Tull, there's a line in one of his songs, he who made kittens put snakes in the grass. And it's true. The same God that made kittens also made snakes. The other thing too about this is the devil is a tempter. And I may have a different point of view on how he came to be in his history, but that doesn't matter. The point is, he's here to tempt us, to test us, and God's watching. I want to say a couple things about God's sovereignty, and I want to say a couple things about how God stands behind what's going on this planet. And the reason I'm going to do this is because there's some people that think, and I don't know if there's anybody in this room, that God is good, and God is love, and the devil is bad, and the devil goes out at night and creates all this havoc, and then God wakes up the next day and kind of goes around trying to fix it. And that's not what I see in the Bible. And You know, when we read Job, the devil wasn't allowed to do anything to Job that God didn't give him permission to do. So we'll read a couple verses. Deuteronomy 32, 39 through 41. Now see that I, even I, am he, and there is no God besides me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Nor is there anyone who can deliver from my hand. Isaiah 45, 7 through 8. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things. So God stands behind this. He's not surprised. He doesn't wake up in the morning and go around fixing what the devil did. He's in control. He knows what he's doing. And like I said at the beginning, he's watching and he's seeing who's going to be loyal to him, and they're the ones that get to rule and reign with him. Now, the whole rule and reign thing, I don't even begin to understand who that's going to be or how that's going to work. But I know it says it. You know, when it comes to bad things happening on this planet, I always get kind of a kick how with some people, when something bad happens, it's God's fault. You know, and they get mad at God because he should have done something. And but it's also kind of funny with those people, when something good happens in their life, they don't give him credit. So it's like he only kind of gets the bad, you know, stuff, and anytime anything good goes, well, he didn't have anything to do with it. It was all me. So when I look around and I see pain and I see suffering, because you hear a lot of people, you know, talk about having a hard time believing in God because of all the pain and suffering. It kind of goes back to that old thing. I can't remember what philosopher said it, but it was like, God is either not good, God is either not love, or God is not all-powerful. This guy wasn't a Christian. Because if God was good, he would stop suffering, which means he must not be all-powerful. Or if he is all-powerful, he must not be good, because then he would stop suffering if he had the power to. And a lot of people get tripped up on that. They think, yeah, that's right. You know, either God isn't good or he isn't all-powerful. Because when I look around, there's a lot of bad stuff happening. No, the Bible tells us that he is both love and good and all-powerful. He knows what he's doing, and he's got a plan. And Jesus is part of that plan, and we'll go into that in a little while. So when I look out and I see a lot of the pain, and I kind of took a detour there because people like to blame God for everything, it's man that invented bombs. It's man that invented mustard gas. It's man that invented the rack, whips, and bayonets. So there's a lot of evil on this planet that we're doing to each other. And God gets, you know, on the hook for that somehow. Now, we may have to come up with a different answer if there's a typhoon or we get, you know, chased by a bear out in the wilderness. Then we can say, okay, now we need to talk about that because that seems to be more something that, you know, God may be directly behind. But when it comes to getting mugged in the park here, that goes back to the free will thing, right? I don't think we can blame God for that. I think people don't think out. Well, I think there's a lot of people now in our culture, they don't think at all. But they don't think out what kind of world, they want this world, they want to have free will, but they want it to be all lollipops and daisies. And that's as far as their thinking goes. They don't go past that and to think, well, how does that world actually look? I'll give you an example. If I go to build a house, I need something rigid and stiff like a 2x4 to build the walls, or build the roof. It needs to be solid, it needs to be rigid. But I can also take that same 2x4 and knock my neighbor over the head with it. When I go to Costco, and I'm pushing around my cart, the floor's got to be hard, so my cart will roll on it. But if I slip and fall, that's also a hard floor, I'm going to crack my head. So how does this fantasy world look that people think, they don't think it out, but they think somehow I'm going to have free will, but yet nothing bad's ever going to happen to me. So how does that look? If I got this 2x4 in my hand, and I go to hit my neighbor over the head with it, does it turn into a marshmallow? And at what point? A foot away from his head, an inch away from his head? Or does it turn into, something kind of globby when I get the thought in my head that I'm going to hit him over the head? See, when you start thinking it out, it's really nonsensical. People are really asking for some kind of a fantasy world that can't exist. It can't exist. The same 2x4 that's holding my roof up, I can whack my neighbor over the head, and that's my choice.
What's his address so we can tell him what
I haven't done that yet. Colossians 1:24, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you. There you go. And fill up on my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ for the sake of his body, which is the church. This is another thing, like I said at the beginning, about this whole big behind the curtain picture of, free will, sovereignty, and sin. I don't claim to understand this verse exactly, but Paul is saying that his flesh, what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ. Well, he's not talking there has anything to do with the atonement. Jesus suffered completely. He did his, he sat down at the right hand of the Father. He said it is finished. So Paul's not saying that there's anything lacking in there. I think what he's saying is there's something that we as Christians need to do going forward. Christ came down and did what he did, and he suffered. And now we suffer too because we belong to him and because we're taking this word out and we're living this life. And in this country, Christians really haven't had to suffer that much for their faith.
Which verse was that?
Colossians 1:24. There are lots of countries, people are suffering. They're suffering, and I think that's what Paul means here, the lack. There's no lack in what Christ did, but in the whole big story, in the whole thing that God's doing on this planet, there's a part that we play. There's a hole out there somewhere that we can fill up being Christians, and we can help others. When Paul was on the road to Damascus, and he got knocked off his mule, and the voice said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Isn't it interesting? It said me. And Saul was persecuting the church. And the voice said, why are you persecuting me? So there's a definite relationship between Christ and us, and suffering, and what we do in his sufferings. Why are you persecuting me? Who's me, the church? When we suffer, Christ suffers. So I think that's what Paul meant in Philippians 3:10, that I may know him in the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. I've always liked that, the fellowship of his sufferings. We can look at our sufferings and we can do everything we can to get out of it. We can do it wrong. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, if we're in a bad place, that we shouldn't work to get out of it. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there's something that we can do there. Something we can grow. We can become more like Christ. There's a fellowship that happens there. His sufferings and our sufferings. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. Of God chose to come into our lives, onto this planet, and participate with us. We don't just suffer alone, we suffer together with Christ. Suffering can be an essential ingredient that binds us with Christ. I'm going to read that sentence again. Suffering can be an essential ingredient that binds us to Christ. You know the key word there? Can. I didn't say suffering is an essential ingredient that binds us with Christ. It can be. It goes back to that free will thinking. It's up to us. How do we want to suffer? How do we want to run our race? All right, my third point, halfway through here. Our race, a test from God. Psalm 11:5, the Lord tests the righteous. Job 23:10, when he has tried you, I shall come out as gold. Jeremiah 17:10, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind. Proverbs 17:3, the Lord tests the heart. 1 Corinthians 10:13, God keeps his promise and will not allow you to be tested beyond your power to remain firm. James 1:2-4, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. I want to stop on that James 1. I remember as a young man reading that verse. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. And as a young Christian, I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And I guess as a young Christian too, there's this tendency to think, well, that was the apostles. You know, they're kind of held to a higher standard than us. You know, those guys, you know, they're up here and I'm down here. No. And as I grew in the Lord, and as I suffered, I came to realize that he knew what he was talking about. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. Why? Because they can make you better. They can make you sweeter. They can grow you. They can help you become close to Jesus. You know, that fellowship with Jesus. This life is a boot camp for the next one. It really is. It's a boot camp. You know, in Jesus' time, the Jews rejected, not all of them, there was a remnant, but most of the Jews rejected Jesus because he didn't act the way they thought he should. They were counting on somebody coming in there and overthrowing Rome, doing some other things, kind of being a regular earthly king. He didn't act the way that they thought he should. And when I look around, what I see is, I think you could do a poll on most people in this country, or certainly a lot, and if they have given up on God or really aren't that serious about him, it's because he didn't act the way they thought he should. Something in their life happened, and they prayed about it, and they were earnest, and God didn't come through for them. Didn't act the way that they thought he should. And it's sad because, going back to what I said earlier, you know, God is not a benevolent grandfather. He's a father. The Bible uses the word father, not grandfather. And like the surgeon, you know, he's going to get that sin out of us. He's going to get that cancer out of us. And so, when we go out in the world, we need to spread the gospel, which is God's not going to act the way you think he should. You know, you need to read the Bible if you want to know how he acts. Isn't it funny how the people that know exactly how he should act don't know anything about the Bible? But somehow they're experts on how God should act. Well, God should do this and God should do that. Well, you ever read the Bible? Well, no. You know, we need to keep that in mind too, even as Christians, right? I mean, even at my age as a Christian, there's times I gotta kind of be like, hold on here, Leif, you know. You and God aren't thinking the same way about this. You know, and I'm gonna take a little bit of a rabbit trail here. I don't even have this in my notes. You know, the Bible says that we you know, if you pray, you get what you want. It's like the word of faith movement, you know. Well, it says if we ask, we have got it, you know. Yeah, it says if we ask in his name, which means if it's his will and if it's good for us. That's what that means. If we ask for something and if it's in his will and it's good for us, he'll give it to us. Where we go wrong is thinking what's good for us, right? That's where we have the problem. Because what we think is good for us, God doesn't always think what's good for us. And by the way, he's the expert on what's good for us. Another little C.S. Lewis quote here, and I don't have this verbatim, but he said something like, it's not that I don't think that God will do the best for me, it's I'm afraid how much the best is going to hurt. And boy, is that true. You know, we've all seen, this is about our race and being tested. We've all seen movies like Rocky, where somebody's trying to accomplish this goal. And, as a viewer, you can see what he's going through. He's going through this hell of running and doing push-ups. And it's not just Rocky. There's so many films out there about whether it's sports teams or whatever, And as the viewer, you're on the side of the coach. Even though it's, killing this poor guy to do all these push-ups or all these laps, you're on the side of the coach because the coach is, trying to make something out of this person and trying to, get better so that they can win the fight or the race, Which is right. That's the way we should view it. But isn't it funny how when we get out in the world in our own lives and things kind of start getting a little hard, it's like, I'm out of here. This is, forget it. Forget it, God. This is, I'm quitting. We need to be kind of like Rocky. We need to be, we need to think of life that way. We need to, it is a test. God does test us. I read those verses. Yeah, it's hard, but we need to be like that guy doing the push-ups or the laps. There's a reason we're doing this, He's trying to, get us ready for eternity. Paul in Romans 8:37 said, more than conquerors. He uses that term, more than conquerors. That's an interesting term, isn't it? More than conquerors. How do you be more than a conqueror? A conqueror is somebody that comes in and they, have a fight or a struggle or a battle and they win, they conquer, Well, how can you be more than that? You know what I think Paul means there? Is staying in the race, gutting it out day after day after day. That's harder than being a conqueror. A conqueror can come in one time, kick somebody's butt, go into another country, win. How do you be more than a conqueror? When you're in your situation. You're in the race that God's given you. Because He's given each one of us a race, and you stay in it. You stay in it, and you stay true. You stay loyal. That's being more than a conqueror. And that's what I think He meant. And I think there's a bigger reward for people that are more than conquerors and in a situation, and it is hard, and they stay with it, and they stay loyal, than there will be for people that do one time do a big thing. I went here and did this big thing. Romans 8:28, we all know that. For all things work together for good, right? To them that love the Lord and call according to His purpose. There's an if there too, right? There's an if there. And it goes back to this thing about our choice and free will. That's a great verse though, because it does say that if we stay on God's side, if we keep plowing, then what we're going through will be for our good. And like Corbin said a couple weeks ago, it may be good we realize now, or it may be good we don't realize until we get to heaven. When I think of Romans 8:28, I think of things working together for good for those. There should be an if in there, and there really is an if. Because you go through suffering, and it's just suffering. It doesn't make you any better. It just stinks. But I think of a melon out in the field, and the sun of adversity is beaten down. You can think of the sun as being adversity, and this melon can either ripen or it can rot. And I bet we all know people in our culture and in our lives or at our work or wherever we live that the adversity has rotted them. It's rotted them. Or it can make us sweet. The choice is up to us. The other thing about our race? Time out. Everybody doing okay?
We only got an hour and a half left.
Okay. It won't be that long. I don't think I can last that long. Here's another thing, too, about our race. Life's going to send things in our path, and we're going to have troubles, and we're going to have trials down here. And here's what I'm trying to say. Don't make them for yourself. It's one thing, you don't have to go looking for trouble. Trouble will come to you. What am I trying to say here? Let's live our lives to where we're not creating our own problems. If we got problems with the spouse or boss or physical or whatever, that's one thing. But we got problems because of stuff we're doing to ourselves. If I have to buy a $5 latte on the way to work every morning and I don't have enough to pay my my rent, that's me. That's on me. You get what I'm saying here? Or if I have a habit or something, or a tendency in my personality that's, that's making my right race harder, let's not do that. We got enough of a hard time out there, right? Living for God and flying straight and doing what's right. Let's not shoot ourselves in our own foots. Okay. Fourth point. There's probably a lot more points that you guys could talk to about this, but this is what I came up with. The other thing too about coming up with this, I have never had such a problem coming up with something. I don't know what it was, but and I kind of had this track to run on, and then it seemed like God changed my mind. But one thing I've always kind of tried to keep in mind when I do this kind of stuff is I just want to be open to what God's telling me. This is His show, right? This is His church. We're His people. Okay. I titled this one, "Our Staying in the Race Helps Others." When Job went through what he was going through, did he know that we'd be reading about that thousands of years later? No. How much comfort have we got in reading that story? I got to tell you, I get comfort in reading that story because when you read what that guy went through, it kind of makes what we're going through, I love this saying. Os Guinness had this saying that I probably, Lori gets sick of hearing it because I probably got to say it twice a day, but he said one of my favorite sayings is, comparison is the mother of clarity. And you go back and look at some of these people and what they went through, and by the way, that is something to do when you're going through hard times. Is don't compare yourself to the guy who's out here and nothing's wrong has ever happened to him and he's living fat and happy. Start thinking about some of the handicaps and some of the things that, think about Job, What about Paul in prison? He didn't know that people would be reading about him thousands of years later. What's the point I'm making? We could be going through things and we don't know. We don't know who's watching. We don't know who's watching us and seeing, what's that person going to do when the heat's on? So our staying in the race helps others. Here's another quote I like, and I have no clue where this came from because I've had it in my head for so long and I don't remember, but I like this one. I don't fully trust anybody who doesn't have a limp. I don't fully trust anybody who doesn't have a limp. I like that because you know what that tells me? That person's been through life. That person's been beat up on. That person has gone through some stuff and they're still standing. They may be limping, but they're going. They're going and they're staying true. There was this park where me and Lori, south of where me and Lori raised our boys, in Monmouth, Oregon. And this is an old park, and it was an old park like the Pioneer kind of days, and it's called Helmut Park. And we had this dog, and we'd take her down there and let her run around, And one day, we started kind of looking a little bit closer, and we noticed the trees. And we noticed how much those poor trees had gone through, some of them 100 years old or more, and had winds broken off, and you could see the age, and you could see the wear and tear of life on those trees. It wasn't like you look at a new tree, and it's all nice and symmetrical. These poor trees, you could tell by looking at them, they've been through the ringer. But there's something beautiful about that. There was a harsh beauty in those trees. There's something nice about looking at those trees and saying, that thing's still standing. It went through the, Columbus Day storm of 1962. It went through this, it went through that, but it's still standing. You know how spice gets its aroma? It gets crushed. That's how it gets its aroma. That's how it gets its flavor. You got to take a spice and you got to crush it up, and that's when you get this aroma and this flavor. And it's true that before God uses a person, He's got to break them. It really is. It's that old thing, it's that old man, it's that flesh. And like going back to my analogy of the surgeon, he's got to get that out. And pain and suffering is the way He does it. That's why James said, count it all joy. You know, when Jesus was on the cross, they offered him some gall. And when he knew what it was, he didn't take it. Well, what it was is a narcotic. It's something that gets you out of your head. It's like taking fentanyl or something like that. It's kind of puts you in a fog. And when he knew what that was, he refused it. Because he was going to run his race. That was his cup to drink, and he was going to drink it. That was his race. And it was hard. And he suffered for us, but he was going to do it. He wasn't going to dope himself up and not be there. He was going to be there. He's going to be all in for us. So what we see sometimes in the world, Corbin brought this up too. That guy did a heck of a job. He did. And I heard that was his first sermon. I'm telling you what. Anyway, we see there's trouble, and there's trials, and there's suffering. We know that. Anybody should know that. What we see is the wrong way to handle it. We dope ourselves up. We drink ourselves up. We smoke ourselves up. We sex ourselves up, right? The world's got all these ways of taking their gall, of not running the race, of getting out of it. Which, by the way, you do that in suffering just as suffering. You just suffer and die. So as Christians, we drink our cup. Jesus drank his cup, we drink our cup. We stay in the race, we stay sober. I'm not saying you can't do something to make yourself feel. I'm not saying, don't take a Tylenol. That's not where I'm going here. I'm saying let's not, let's do this right. Let's do this right. And if it means that I suffer more, if I have to do it right, the right way, then I suffer more. And he'll be there. He'll be there with us. He'll be there. Okay, almost done. I'm going to read this little poem here, which I thought was pretty good. Two frogs. You ever have that?
I know that feeling.
Okay. We're almost done here. Hang on. Two frogs fell into a deep cream bowl. One was an optimistic soul, but the other took the gloomy view. We shall drown, he cried, without more ado. So with a last despairing cry, he flung up his legs and said goodbye. Quoth the other frog with a merry grin, I can't get out, but I won't give in. I'll just swim around till my strength is spent, then will I die the more content. Bravely he swam till it would seem his struggles began to churn the cream. On the top of the butter at last he stopped, and out of the bowl he gaily hopped. What of the morale? 'Tis easily found. If you can't hop out, keep swimming around. We need to be like that frog. We need to keep swimming around. We need to hang in there. We need to run a race. So what about us? This is the conclusion. What about us? Maybe your race has been relatively easy. There are people like that. And in a way, I feel sorry for those people. Do you know there's more people ruined by success than failure? There's more people ruined. And when ruined, I mean ultimately, in the grand scheme of eternity, there's more people ruined by success than failure. Our society has such an allergic reaction to failure. But really, it's like Jesus said, it's the poor in spirit. It's the people that are lowly that come. It's these people. I feel sorry for people that they've had it easy and they've had it good and they've never had to endure this and become more like Christ. There's going to be people that stand in front of God that have had and we could probably think of some people like that. It seems like everything comes up roses for them. Those people would give everything they've got to come back down to this planet and live a miserable existence. to be with God for eternity. They would give up their life of ease, their riches or whatever. They would come back here and live under a bridge if it meant they were able to be with God for eternity. So we got to look, it's like Pastor last week, Mike, is that Mike Mullen? We got to look at the big picture. We got to look at eternity, and that has to help drive how we behave. You know, another thing I think about people that have had it easy, and this is kind of interesting, is Jesus himself said it's hard for rich people to get into heaven. He said it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Isn't it funny how many people want to be rich? Does that strike you a little weird? I think it does. It strikes me as being odd. Like, oh, I want to win the lottery. I'm going to, struggle to be rich. You know, these riches, it's like, I'm not getting it, you know. If being rich is going to make it harder for me to, live my life for God or get to heaven, then no. No. And if you want to back up and even look at the bigger picture, when you look at us in this country compared to the rest of the world, we are rich. So we got to be on the ball here. We got to be on the ball. We're going to run our race. But Leif, you don't know what a buckethead I married. Run your race. Run your race. Well, Leif, you don't know my boss. You don't know my boss. Run your race. Run your race. I've had my race. I got my race. I had to run it. I had to stay in there. Things we pray that God take this from me, take this from me, take this out of my head, do this, do that. We pray. You know what God says? I'll be there. I'll be there with you. Run your race. Believe you don't understand my physical situation. Run your race. That's your race. Run it. God wants you to. You'll be better for it. You'll help others around you. You'll help yourself. God's watching. We'll put him first. We'll run our race. He drank his cup. It's a good thing he did, right? You'd be in big trouble if he didn't. That's another thing too. Jesus prayed in the garden. If there's any other way to do this, let's do that. But your will, not mine. And that's as Christians. We got to have Christian maturity. I've prayed that a lot of times in my life. I don't like this God. This is not what I had in mind. But if it's your will, then help me. Help me through it. Hold my hand. And he will. So let's drink our cup and let's run our race. He did, and we should. Let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for sending Jesus, and thank you that he did run his race, and he did drink his cup, and that resulted in our salvation and our being put right with you. And I don't know the race that everybody's running in this room, but you do. But you do. And you'll hold their hand, and you'll go through it with them. And help us to ripen and not rot. And help us as we go out in this world around people that are rotting and suffering and doing it wrong. Help us to be salt and light and say, there's something in this. There's a way to do this right, and his name is Jesus. And he can come with you and suffer with you and help you. Help us to go out, spread this gospel. Help our suffering to help others. We don't know who's watching. Help us to run this race and run it right. In Jesus' name, amen.